You are tuning to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. We're going to talk about Cole Ragans to open up the show. And is he a lock already for the 2024 rotation? I'll let you know my thoughts coming up shortly. Next, the Royals lost last night blatantly because of a blown call and Vic Carapazza. We're going to talk about that about 15 or 20 minutes or so. And lastly, is it smart to bring back a guy like Nick Wittgren? He reminds me a lot of Taylor Clark last year, so I'll give you my thoughts then. All of that is coming up next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen every day. And you can always find us on those podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and you can always find us on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. And if you want a very simple way on to find all those links, or if you don't have any of those podcasting platforms, at least the app, you can always find me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15, and I tweet out the links every single day, so you don't have to go through the hassle. They'll just be right there for you with a picture of today's episode. Now, we got a lot of big things to get into today, and I'm surprised that I didn't record last night. Last night I was fired up, which is why I think I need to push off why I was fired up into the second segment. Because if I wasn't fired up and fueled with anger last night, I could have made the entirety of today's show based on Cole Ragans. I think at times with the Royals front office and when they've made trades, we always have that hesitancy. We never want to fully jump into a trade because this organization and its fan base have been let down so many times, either hanging on to a guy too long, having high expectations for prospects, having high expectations for guys coming over through trade, and more often than not, the Royals have botched those trades. It's not to completely come down and grill the organization, but I could bring up multiple examples in the last 5 to 6 years when the Royals made a bad trade and they didn't get much in return, or they hung on to a guy way too long and didn't get enough back. Now it's a wait-and-see game here with what the Royals got with Ryan Yarbrough and Scott Barlow. Right now, Scott Barlow is struggling mightily for San Diego, so it might just be if the Royals get anything out of the two guys they acquired in Jesus Rios and Henry Williams, they've won that trade. The Ryan Yarbrough deal, probably going to be a while till we know what Figueroa is really like. I'm assuming we'll see Devin Mann in the September call-ups phase. I thought it'd be a lot sooner than now, but the Royals appear to be in no rush to bring up Devin Mann, despite having some depth problems at first base. But a trade I'm starting to wonder if you can already call it, and it would be premature. I'm trying not to get too caught up in recency bias. But this Aroldis Chapman trade that brought Cole Ragans and Rony Cabrera is really turning out to be a nice one. I'll be completely honest with you. When the Royals made that trade, I was not high on Cole Ragans. I tweeted it out. And if Cole Ragans finishes the year strong, I am going to screenshot that tweet and put it back out for everybody else to see. Because I know exactly what I said. I said I'm not too high on Cole Ragans. Stuff isn't that good to me. But I am pretty high on Rony Cabrera, who's continued to play pretty well in the Arizona League for one of the rookie Royals teams. So to me, he was the gem, if you will. And that felt a bit light to me. That felt really light for what you got out of Aroldis Chapman. Now, Chapman was a 35-year-old rental. Yes, he had looked great, but he had pitched less than 30 innings. So I tried to temper my expectations a little bit and say, okay, were you going to get the moon for Aroldis Chapman, a 35-year-old Chapman, a team who's only going to be using him for a half a season? Right? Are you going to get a top 100 prospect? Well, they didn't. Rony Cabrera is not eligible to be listed as a prospect yet, and Cole Ragans was far past that point. So here comes Ragans, this guy that has had 2 Tommy John surgeries back-to-back. It wasn't like he had Tommy John when he was 22 and then not again until he's 24. It was back-to-back. The Royals broadcast was talking about that in last night's game against Boston. And when he came back, I think the spin rate was still really good, but the velocity usually sat between 90 and 94, maxing out at 94. The minute Cole Ragans comes to Kansas City, that velocity spikes by 4 to 5 miles an hour. Last night, he was averaging around 95 to 96, topping out at 98. Before Carlos Hernandez came in and blew the doors off everybody and got, screwed by an awful call by an awful umpire, Cole Ragans had 3 of the hardest thrown pitches all night. For a long time before Boston went to his bullpen, he had 5, all 5 of the hardest pitches thrown last night. But it's not just velocity with him. It's one thing to get caught up in velocity. If I'm being quite honest with you, if it was just about velocity with Cole Ragans, I'd still be pretty excited. If you have a lefty with that spin rate throwing 97, 98, 99, that's not a number 3, number 4. That's a legitimate number 1, number 2 guy. And I'm not going to say Cole Ragans is the opening day starter, but if he dominates the rest of the year, who else am I going to give it to? If they sign somebody in the offseason, a big name like Jordan Montgomery, and I have no indication that they will, just a hope and a prayer, then yes, they'll go with him. I doubt it'll be Brady Singer. Maybe you can go with the comfortable take with Brady Singer. You can go with the comfortable pick. But Cole Ragans is that guy. 11 strikeouts last night, 6 2/3, and I thought he was done after 6 innings. He was around 94 pitches, and Matt Contreras said, no, you got one more inning in you. At least go until you give up a base runner. Comes back out for the 7th, strikeout, and then unfortunately allows 1 base runner, so they bring him out of the game. Or, excuse me, he didn't allow a base runner. He actually just didn't get to face a 3rd guy. Matt Contreras thought he had a high enough pitch count, went to Nick Wittgren, got out of that pretty quickly. We'll talk about Nick Wittgren in the 3rd segment of our show. But 11 Ks, it took 1 start for him to shatter his career high. So he had 5 strikeouts, I believe, against Tampa and his first start for the Royals. Then he comes back after being in Omaha, starts against the Mets, and he has a career high 8 Ks. And then last night, he shatters that and has a career high 11 Ks, only 1 walk. And he's pumping 95, 96, 97, 98. The cutter and the slider look good. The spin rate was phenomenal, and that is just a huge part of this. The spin rate makes 96 and 97 feel like 101. The Royals have not had a guy like Cole Ragans in a long, long time. Maybe I just have to go back to Danny Duffy because that feels like the popular comp so far in Kansas City. A prime Danny Duffy, that's what he could be trending to, and I'm not going to complain about that. Danny Duffy, despite the injuries, was very good in his prime. But to me, Cole Ragans is a lock for 2024. Assuming he stays healthy, I don't even care about what the numbers look like in spring training. He's a lock. He's a number 1 or number 2 in this rotation next year. The stuff is there. And I'm banking on that stuff to continue to only get better. It's shown that the velocity is here to stay. The spin rate is just as good. The secondary offering, that changeup, it's lethal. The cutter and slider, it's a very good pairing pitch. Or 2 pairing pitches at that. He, to me, is starting to show why the Royals' pitching development, their front office, is just slightly different than the way things were. We've seen some guys really ramp it up. Carlos Hernandez, throw out what he did last night because, again, he got screwed over. Aroldis Chapman, he was fixed. Cole Ragans looks to be really good. Chris Bubich early on looked to be really good. The Royals' pitching development is starting to show what they can do, and he may be the poster child now. I use that term a lot, the poster child of pitching development. We're seeing the lower levels at work a lot. We've been waiting to see what it looks like in Kansas City, and quickly, Cole Ragans is showing that he can be one of those guys. I am incredibly impressed. I think the dude's a stud. It's only been 3 starts. I know I'm probably leaning into the bias a bit, but I think he's a lock. He's an absolute lock for the 2024 rotation, and I think he's going to be a top 3 guy, depending on what the Royals do in free agency. But he was dominant last night. 6-2 loss for the Royals at Fenway Park, but we're getting into why it was a 6-2 loss coming up here in about 3 minutes or so. But Cole Ragans, 11 Ks a career high, 6 2/3, just 1 earned run, 2 runs total in that outing. Okay, so the Royals did lose 6-2 last night, but that was an abomination. Once again, it took us one day to find another umpire to blame. First, it was Ben May in Philadelphia. Now it's Vic Carapazza. And I'm telling you, Vic Carapazza is 100 times worse than Ben May. We're going to get into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we talk about the umpiring blunders last night at Fenway Park, let's give a shout out to one of today's title sponsors in BetterHelp. Now, today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp, and whether you're dealing with decisions around your career, relationships, or anything else, therapy helps you stay connected so you can move forward with confidence and excitement. I get it, right? Going to therapy sometimes can be a tough commitment, a time commitment. Maybe you're too busy with work. Maybe you're too busy with your social life, but you always need to be open to trying therapy if you really need it. And I think everybody out there really needs somebody to talk to from time to time. You can't just burden other people every single time with your issues. There are people out there wanting to help you. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, so it can fit your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a questionnaire to get matched with your therapist. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnMLB today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnMLB. Again, it took us one day. It took us one day to find a different umpire to blame. And last night may have been one of the worst calls that I have witnessed covering the Royals, being a fan of the Royals. And like it was with Ragans, maybe I'm leaning into the recency bias here. Maybe I'm leaning into it just happened, so I'm going to be furious about it. But I'll tell you, last night, for a team that has 78 losses in August, less than 40 wins in August, I was fuming, man, because it felt like last night the Royals were just taken advantage of by a guy who just is incompetent, can't do his job. And I think a lot of umpires in the game, I defended them slightly in yesterday's episode. I think a lot of umpires out there just want to have the power. They've been around the game long enough. You question me, no, you're going to be gone. No, you don't question me. You don't embarrass me on my field. I think there's a lot of umpires out there that think fans pay money to come see them control the game. Vic Carapazza's one. Vic Carapazza last night became an absolute embarrassment to the game of baseball. That was an atrocity. And listen, humans make errors. Okay, we discussed this too. Humans make errors. Players make errors. Coaches make errors. And umpires, more often than not, make errors. It's how you behave after you make that error. We discussed this with Ben May. Ben May made a horrific call. Horribly low zone. The pitch was 5 inches below the zone, 5 to 6 inches below zone. He rings up Dairon Blanco, immediately ejects Alex Zumwalt and Matt Quatraro. That's a defense mechanism only. I'm not going to let you come out here and embarrass me, so I'm just going to eject you to get it over with. And last night, as Carlos Hernandez is on the bump, sold out Fenway Park, the game's been competitive. The Royals fought back to tie the game. Here's Carlos Hernandez pumping 100 on every single pitch. He's facing, can't even remember who it was at the time, but it was a guy who had struck out 3 times, in the game for Boston. I think it was Ruiz, I believe. I'm blanking on who it was. But anyways, it's not the point of it. He's facing somebody with 2 outs. It's first and second, 3-2 count. And Carlos Hernandez throws a 100-mile-an-hour fastball up in the zone, and the dude clearly swings. In fact, the crazy thing of this all is everybody in the park knew he swung. You know, the hitter knew he swung. Carlos Hernandez knew he swung. The video replay guy knew he swung. And you could say, well, it's the black bat, and the black bat blends in with the crowd. I don't care about that. If you're at the biggest level, you're at the major league level, and you've been doing this a long time, you're telling me your only excuse is it's a black bat, it blends in, I can't really see it. That wasn't even 50-50. The bat broke the plane by 5 feet. It was a 3/4 swing. It wasn't even 50-50. Everybody in the ballpark knew that was a swing. And what does Vic Carapazza do? Vic Carapazza says it's not a swing, immediately puts his arms up in the air like, who are you talking to? As the Royals dugout explodes, saying that's a full swing. We should be in the dugout right now. The Royals were running off the field. Boston's preparing to go out for the top of the 10th. And Vic Carapazza throws up his hands like, how do you think I'm not right? Immediately ejects Matt Quatrero before he's left the dugout. And that's what I got on Ben May about is when you're in a spot like that, it's a big time call. You don't even give the manager half a second to argue it. That's game changing. And Vic Carapazza, let me be completely straight here. He has done this his entire career. Vic Carapazza is atrocious at his job. He is awful. And last night, it was one of many calls that have made him just a joke to baseball. There's a lot of umpires that handle and dictate games like this. You blow calls in this moment, and then I'm just going to immediately be all defensive and sensitive and eject somebody for arguing that call. And what do we know about what happened after the game? Vic Carapazza likely went down into the video room, saw the call, saw he was wrong, and goes, that's unfortunate. I blew the call. Do we hear anything about it? No. Does he have to answer any questions? No. Is he going to be behind home plate tonight? Yes, he will. And he's going to blow 50 more calls behind the plate. It's a joke, man. It's an absolute joke. And no, I should not get too worked up about a team that is dead last. They've got the second most losses in Major League Baseball. They've been abysmal. The hitting with runners in scoring position really controlled the game last night for the Royals. But that's an abomination. I can't even defend that other things happened. But I can't say, well, you can't get completely on the call because the Royals put themselves in their spot. No, the Royals should have been in the top of the 10th inning. 10 out of 10 times, that's a swing. That is not up for debate. That was a clear swing. And what happens the next pitch to Pablo Reyes? Grand slam. It's a joke. It's an absolute joke that in Major League Baseball, we have people like Vic Carapazza who can dictate the outcome of a game blatantly like that. Like I said to begin the segment, human error happens in baseball. Umpires are going to make mistakes. They're not perfect. But you cannot miss a call like that in that moment and then behave like that right after the call. That's an embarrassment to the game. And there's too many guys in baseball like that. There are far too many umpires that think it's a show for them. When they get a manager arguing with them, they're baiting them so that they can eject them. And especially with crowds like last night at Fenway Park, a phenomenal crowd. It's sold out. They're on their feet. I guarantee you, Vic Carapazza ejected Matt Quatrero so quickly because he knew he'd get a big rise out of the crowd. Because then he'd be one of the favorite guys in the ballpark. I think every Boston fan last night should be sending flowers and presents to Vic Carapazza's hotel room because of how he impacted that game. That's a joke. An absolute joke. And no, if the Royals win last night, does it make it any different for the season other than you just feel good? Cole Ragans dominated. Carlos Hernandez was throwing gas out of the bullpen. Michael Garcia, Bobby Witt Jr. had RBI hits. You feel good about last night's game. But all of that is washed away because Carapazza thought he was the star of the show. And in the end, he's just a joke. He's an absolute joke, and we won't hear an apology at all. He doesn't care about it. He's blown hundreds of calls before. I checked it out on YouTube. If you're ever bored and you just want to have some fun, there's like 3 videos on YouTube just titled Vic Carapazza Sucks, and they're all longer than 5 minutes. And if you want to get more upset or just laugh at the incompetence of a bad umpire, go check all that out for Vic Carapazza because he completely dictated that game last night. completely dictated the bottom of the ninth inning, that led to the Red Sox walking it off. Royals made mistakes early on, and Vic Carapazza wasn't really a big-time part of the game until that moment. And that's not even close, man. That is a blatantly horrific call, and to behave like that afterwards, that's a joke. That is an absolute joke. We'll see what he looks like behind the plate, but I can't guarantee it's going to be smooth sailing. And you've already pissed off the Royals dugout, so I'm sure they're not going to be doing you any favors tonight against the Boston Red Sox. Okay, back to some positive stuff, because when we come back, I have a guy in the bullpen that's starting to grow on me a little bit, and it's Nick Wittgren, who in his last 7 outings has allowed only 1 hit. We're going to talk about him next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we talk about Nick Wittgren and his recent success, let's give a shout out to one of today's other title sponsors in eBay Motors. Now, this episode of Locked On is also brought to you by eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. So for the parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit, ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. I just had to get a lot off my chest there. I think every Royals fan was feeling the same way with how that game ended and Vic Carapazza largely impacting that game. But amidst the turmoil that we all went through, there still was a lot of positives. Bobby Witt Jr. was scorching the ball last night, had a game-tying double in the 7th inning, I believe it was. Michael Garcia had an RBI single. Cole Ragans, as we talked about in the opening segment, he was dominant. And Nick Wittgren, once again, was pretty nails out of the bullpen. He was brought in a 2-2 game in the 7th inning, and he worked an inning and a third scoreless. Didn't sweat through any of it. He's throwing strikes. His stuff looked good. And he's now had 7 consecutive outings and allowed just 1 hit. And it's made me wonder if the Royals, when rebuilding their bullpen, they're definitely using this as a tryout. And I think for me, I wanted the bullpen completely purged. I said that in yesterday's episode. I think that the guys you keep, Carlos Hernandez, Austin Cox, you find everybody else from elsewhere. You find replacements for John Heasley. You find replacements for guys like Dylan Coleman. You find replacements for guys like James MacArthur. I mean, right now in the bullpen, of the 8 guys that are in the bullpen, 6 of them were not on the opening day roster. Coleman and Hernandez were the only guys that were. So a purge is not out of the realm of possibility. That is a very likely scenario. That is a route the Royals can take. But Nick Wittgren is slowly entering his name into the conversation. He has had success and a lot of success at the major league level. He was great in Cleveland for a lot of those great back-end bullpens. I mean, he was a solid 6th, 7th inning guy. Threw a lot of strikes. Not a big strikeout guy, but pitch to contact was very good. Could log a lot of innings. He's 32 years old. He was on a minor league deal coming to Kansas City. I'm actually surprised we didn't see him earlier. But once he came to Kansas City, I couldn't really dispute that anymore because he wasn't very good. His ERA was north of 7. He was coming in mop-up situations. And now we're starting to see him a little bit more in crunch time. We're seeing him in 1-run games in the 8th inning. He was there in Philadelphia in the 8th inning for a 2-run lead. And he locked it down. He has been very good over the last 2 weeks or so. And I almost wonder if the Royals will treat Nick Wittgren like they did Taylor Clark. Taylor Clark was a minor league deal, a 1-year minor league deal, was really bad back in June. I think it was like May and June. He was really bad. And I was one of the guys calling for his head, just saying, okay, cut bait. He's clearly not that good. You can cut bait with a guy like this. Then Taylor Clark really pitched well down the stretch. And they gave him another deal. You may be one of the people listening right now and going, why in the world would I want Taylor Clark 2.0? Well, Nick Wittgren's had more success than Taylor Clark at the big league level. He's got a better track record than Taylor Clark. But I think there's a big reason as to why the Royals didn't DFA him. Maybe DFA Clark for that matter either. They believe one of them is going to be in the bullpen next year. At least they want to see if they can. And I think the only way that happens is if Nick Wittgren is a top 2 pitcher in this bullpen to close out this year. He can't be 3 or 4 because there's so much unknown in this bullpen. If it's Carlos Hernandez number 1, Nick Wittgren's got to be number 2. And after last night, at least of late, Nick Wittgren's been the best guy in your bullpen. So if he finishes the year in that upper echelon, I think it's worth considering. He's going to be incredibly cheap. You can get him on another 1-year, $2 million deal. It's not going to cost you much. And maybe you work with more stuff with the spin rate. Maybe you work with a different grip for one of his pitches, and you get him from good to really good again. I mean, we could have some confidence now in the pitching development. Brian Sweeney's worked with him before. In fact, he was one of his main guys in that Cleveland bullpen. So maybe there's more of that connection there that they'll want to keep a guy like Nick Wittgren. I've really liked what I've seen. I did not like what I saw a couple weeks back, but if they didn't DFA him after the deadline with guys down in AAA, clearly there is some sort of future fit for Nick Wittgren. But in my opinion, it's only if he's a top 2 guy in this bullpen to close out the year. That's still a bit far-fetched, but that's what's going to need to happen if he doesn't become one of those members in the purge of this bullpen this offseason. Okay, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And lastly, check us out on all the podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and you can find us on YouTube. Just to hit that follow button and subscribe. But until next time, you take it easy, Kansas City.